Good afternoon and welcome to everyone joining us for the third event in LSBU's Allied Health Professions Practice Learning Showcase. My name is Neil Hudson-Basing and I'm the Corporate Events Manager at London South Bank University. Before we start, I just have a bit of housekeeping to go through with you, starting with a short statement on respect and dignity. Everyone speaking at or attending an LSBU event, whether in person or virtually, should be treated with respect, dignity and courtesy. LSBU operates an environment built on equality, inclusion and acceptance. We value contributions, feedback and comments and wish to create a space for learning, sharing, celebrating and bringing communities together. LSBU does not tolerate any form of abuse, harassment, bullying or discrimination. Inappropriate behaviour, including that potentially impacts or contradicts LSBU's reputation and values, will be treated seriously and acted upon. Anyone exhibiting any example of this behaviour will also be removed from the webinar. We want our events to be an enjoyable, warm and safe experience for all. Thank you for adhering to these guidelines. So just to take you through the Zoom functionality, you'll see a couple of functions at the bottom of your screen. The first, I've enabled closed captioning. That's the little CC symbol at the bottom of the screen. And if you click the up arrow next to it, you can disable that if you don't wish to see it, or you can choose to make the closed captions larger. The next button along is the chat box, and it's fantastic to see people making use of the chat box already. Please continue to do so. It's useful for networking and it helps us to break down the virtual wall that we're all experiencing at the moment. The next button along is the Q&A box, and I'd like to ask you to reserve your questions for the Q&A box as they sometimes get lost in the chat box. In the Q&A box, you can upvote on the questions you most want to see answered by clicking the thumbs up symbol, and that boosts them to the top. And after the presentations, we'll get round to those before the event closes. That's all from me. If you have any questions, I'll be here in the background. I'd now like to hand over to my colleague, Claire.
Sorry, it took me a second just to unmute myself there. Good afternoon, everybody. And I just want to give you a really, really warm welcome to us at LSBU for our practice learning showcase around physiotherapy. My name is Claire Deary. I'm a physiotherapist by profession, but my job at London South Bank is Head of Division for Physiotherapy, Sport Rehabilitation and Chiropractic. Can I have the next slide, please, Mark? Again, just welcome. I hope you're going to have a really interesting afternoon. We want to tell you all about our plans for practice placement, all about our practice placement expansion plans. And we also want to introduce you to our anti-racist strategy, which is really at the heart of LSBU and everything that we do. Next slide, please, Mark. So the agenda is as follows. I'm going to hand over in just a bit to our course director for our BSc physiotherapy program, Dr. Mark Spreckley, and he'll talk to you about the overall practice-based learning, practice placement setting learning. I've said that wrongly. Let's start again, shall I? Mark's going to talk to you about the practice placement and learning strategy at LSBU. Next, we're going to have Dr. Gwyn Owen, who's our Practice Placement Learning Manager at LSBU. And Gwyn works across both our programs at LSBU, which are the BSc and Combined Integrated Masters, plus the pre-registration Masters MSc. And Gwyn really has her hands full with all our practice placements and takes care of all of that side of it for us. Also, we have Tom Ince, who's our AHP Practice Learning Lead, and Tom has a role across all of the allied health professions around placements at LSBU. And we've also delighted to welcome Mish here, who is Mish Ahmed Landayu, who's going to talk to you about student success and our anti-racist education, and she's our specialist in there. Not in our list, but not forgotten, is Chloe Keith-Jopp, who is from Higher Education England, and she's going to talk to you all about AHP practice learning. Can I have the next slide, please? Gosh, where do I begin on the challenging year? I think we have all had an unbelievable year. The word unprecedented keeps coming up time and time again, doesn't it? But actually, I'm not really sure what other way we would describe the year that we've had and the impact that COVID-19 has had on our students, on their educational experience, on their practice placement experiences, on those who manage our practice placement experiences, Gwyn, and Tom and the rest of the physiotherapy team, but also on those of you who supply placements for our students, the huge impact that COVID-19 has had on everybody. And I think the current effects and the long-term effects cannot be underestimated, you know, and we really, really appreciate all the flexibility that our students have shown, all the flexibility that those of you who provide our placements have shown, and all the flexibility. I have to say a very personal thank you to my physiotherapy team, our physiotherapy team, who have shown such resilience and such flexibility and such just pure dedication to what they've been doing over this past year. And I want to thank them for their hard work and ongoing support. And just thank you to everybody for being here. I hope that you have an afternoon that you learn things from. I want to introduce you to our anti-racist strategy that you may not have heard about before. We've got some fantastic people speaking to you. We've got some fantastic students here who are really interested in communicating and talking with you and answering your questions. So enjoy the afternoon. I will be with the panel for the rest of the afternoon, listening myself and joining in where I can. But thank you for everything you do for our students. Thank you to the students, and thank you for everybody for being here. I'm going to pass you over to Mark Spreckley, who's course director for our BSc programs.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, Claire. I'm just going to share my slides with you. So thank you, Claire. As Claire's already introduced me, I'm the course director. It's great to be here, great to see so many people here with us today. I'm going to talk all about practice learning, specifically in physiotherapy. Next slide, please, Tom. First of all, for those that may not be familiar with our programs, physiotherapy at LSBU offers a number of avenues for our students. At undergraduate level, we offer a BSc Hons physiotherapy program combined with an undergraduate integrated master's program, both of different durations. But also we offer the postgraduate program. This is the pre-registration physiotherapy program at MSc level, which is a 2-year intensive program. Next slide, please, Tom. What I want to go on today to talk about is what physiotherapy looks like at LSBU. This is where we integrate not only what we teach in the classroom, but integrate with what we learn with and how we work with you on practice placement. And it's that is integral, that is unique, that we offer the two, that are blended learning, even in these challenging times, as Claire has talked about, how we can blend that learning, how we can work with you, how we can be flexible and adaptable in how we deliver these exciting programs. Thank you. Next slide. So what does learning and practicing contemporary physiotherapy look like at LSBU? Well, we're really excited that we work with many and engage with many partners across the patch. Of course, we talk about our jurisdiction, looking at how we work within the M25, but far beyond that, we also work within the home counties. We see physiotherapy within many different settings, whether that be the traditional community setting or acute sector. Being able to use, for example, technology, looking at teleconferencing, new ways of working, exciting opportunities that have come about through the COVID-19 pandemic. For example, some of our students are even engaged in the mass vaccination centres. I was over and had the privilege of working over at Chelsea, over at Crystal Palace football ground, and indeed being able to work with our students as they meet the public and engage in physiotherapy in a really contemporary way, integrating some of the core principles around communication and looking at the wider picture about how physiotherapy can make such an impact. Thank you. Next slide. This looks like a very complicated model, but it's not. This is really just emphasizing everything that Claire said about our collaborative practice. We couldn't do this without you, but central to what we do is all about our students. It's all about putting them first in the middle. And of course, how we then build that relationship with them from an LSBU academic perspective, but also working in collaboration as practice educators, as placement providers, is key to their success. But also we acknowledge that there are wider stakeholders that we have a relationship with, whether that be the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy, Health Education England, many commissioners of education and also healthcare providers, as well as our governing bodies, regulators such as the HCPC, and of course all our other HEI partnerships that we have with other universities. Thank you, Tom. To give you an overview, I've mentioned a number of programs that we run both at MSc and BSc level. We need to understand that placements are integral to what we do, and of course they're built into year 1 and year 2. So for those BSc students, although year 1 is all about the theoretical, practical components where there is an observational placement, it's not until the 2nd and 3rd year of the BSc programme that there is an opportunity to attend placement. But from the year 1 and year 2 for the MSc students, the programmes, as you can see on this diagram here, demonstrate how they are divided up and split across all semesters running from September through into the summer the following year. This is really unique for us because what we're able to do with this level of programme is be able to combine that with teaching that's blended, whether it be on site, whether it be on campus, whether it be looking at remote learning, but being able to give modules that support and build on the knowledge gained within a practice placement setting. So we have a year 1 set of 3 modules. Each one of our placements is 5 weeks duration. And there are 3 of them that sit in the year 1, whether that be the MSc year 1 or the BSc year 2. And then in the year 2 for the MSc or the year 3 for the BSc, again, another 3 placements of 5 weeks duration. Thank you, Tom. So what are the aims of those programs? Well, in the year 1, there are 5 placements, each of 5 weeks duration, as I've already said. We want to enable learners to develop their interprofessional and personal skills with patients and clients, building the very foundations that lead from the foundational skills that they've learned in the classroom or in the skills lab. Being able to enable learners to apply all aspects of theoretical study, but applying that specifically to clinical practice. This afternoon, I was teaching, just before coming to this session, integrated care, a module on integrated care that really was looking at how we can apply the teachings that we learn at theoretical levels. So last week and today, I've been looking at person-centered practice, collaborative person-centered practice. How does that apply? And of course, then the experience to go out and put that into practice on placement. We also want to be able to allow students to evaluate their effectiveness of their intervention, to always question, reflect, and self-manage their skills in terms of how they manage their time, their independence, and their preparation and management of the programme itself. So those are the aims for year 1 of practice placements. Now let's look at year 2 after we've looked at the outcomes. So if we look at the outcomes here, I've already said we've got 3 placements that make up year 1. Reflecting on those is very important that we have an IPL portfolio, an interprofessional learning portfolio that is formed from the learnings that are undertaken on placement. This is then demonstrated in the year 2. Next slide, please, Tom. Where we build on previous clinical experience. We look at complex case management. We look at some of the challenges. We have the opportunity to look at leadership. We look at other research. All of these elements are built upon in the year 2 on that core foundation, being critically analysing and being able to develop our own skills as practitioners. Next slide, please, Tom. And finally, again, in that year 2, the ability to reflect and develop a portfolio of learning from that reflection is critical to the success of our students on placement. Thank you, Tom. So now we talk about this. This is what we do and what we currently do, but what are our drivers for expansion? Well, we need to realise that we live in a very different world now, having obviously met head-on COVID-19, but also accepting that externally the environment is always changing. We have an adult aging population living much longer, but living with complex comorbidities. How do we meet their specific needs? How can we become person-centered in our approach? Well, certainly this is fully recognised and shared by many of our partners. So for example, we've only got to look at NHS employers, the people action plans that are being generated right now. We look much wider afield at the NHS long-term plan, recognizing some of these core challenges that are going to meet the needs of the physical, the psychological, the biological and social needs of each and every patient. And finally, of course, by the professional bodies that we work with, so the HCPC, for example, and indeed the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy. These are the key drivers for how we expand and meet these challenges face on, as we hope to do with LSBU, working in partnership and in collaboration with you, our providers. Next slide, please, Tom. So I'm delighted now, as we talk more about the expansion strategy that will take us forward, an exciting strategy that will lead the way, we hope, that we continue to work with you and we build these long-lasting relationships. So I'm delighted now to hand over to Chloe, who's going to tell us much more about the expansion strategy. Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much, Mark. I'm just going to share screens. Okay, so in line with the long-term plan, we need to increase our AHP workforce by 27,000 and another 4,000 in the Richards Review, which means supporting many more students so they can join our future workforce and our teams. To support this work, last summer, Health Education England gave £1.2 million worth of funding across London, and my role is to support practice learning for AHPs across the capital. I'm Chloe, I'm a physio by background and AHP clinical fellow, working with Laura Lesford, our London AHP lead for Health Education England, all to support practice learning. It's fantastic to be here and be part of the work LSBU are doing for physiotherapy practice learning. Capital AHP is the joint work sponsored by NHS England, NHS Improvement and Health Education England. Here you can see the work that's being developed across the capital to give a bit of an overview. As part of student practice learning, we're really working in that first aim around learning and development. There are lots of relevant policy documents, but as Mark mentioned, key to this conversation are the long-term plan, people plan and AHPs into action. Health Education England are working across lots of different programmes of work, and the main work to support students at the moment is the NETS, so the survey that's undertaken each year, the AHP faculty test beds and repair, which you can find out much more about on our website. During the first wave, we showed that AHPs are agile, adapting quickly to the changing circumstances and managing to have over 700 students out on placement with a big push in innovation and use of digital. And here just wanted to highlight that there are numerous barriers and challenges to practice learning, some staff related such as redeployment, sickness, annual leave, burnout, environmental factors such as social distancing, small offices. And it's important to think about each of these barriers and work out how we might be able to support our workforce to overcome them. Many of you will have seen and engaged in the crowdsourcing event, which has formed some of the evidence for the objectives of the Health Education England Practice Learning Expansion Programme. And you commented on these 6 main themes, particularly types and models of practice learning and the potential diversity of different settings, how practice learning might be coordinated to best effect, thinking about standardisation generally, but particularly across paperwork, and terminology. So the reason I'm trying my best to use the term practice learning rather than placement. The programme aims to ensure adequate AHP practice learning capacity and quality and has measurable objectives and outputs, including increasing practice learning and evaluation of the funding. But also there's a practice learning exchange which has been set up to share resources and ideas, which you can join through the website. You can find links to other resources such as webinars and quick guides, which have also been developed. And in London, there was £1.2 million given from Health Education England, and largely this money was spent to support roles such as practice education facilitators to support the work highlighted in the programme, particularly around coordinating placements and considering new placement models and settings. But also it's been spent on laptops, tablets and supporting texts. In London, Health Education England have set up some opportunities to engage with practice learning. We have the AHP Practice Learning Club, which is a Microsoft Teams group and community of practice. And this is really a space to connect and network with lots of resources available. We also have our AHP Practice Learning Masterclasses, an opportunity to hear from experts in the field about their experiences of practice learning. So please do get in touch with us if you'd like to be involved. Our email address is there at the bottom. Thanks so much for listening. I'm very happy to answer any questions and we'll share these slides as there are some links and resources at the end. Please do feel free to give us a follow on Twitter to keep up to date with the work that's going on within the capital. And I hope to have highlighted that we need to grow our AHP workforce gradually over the next few years. And currently there are real challenges to student practice learning, but hopefully we can tackle this through considering every opportunity which the team here at LSBU are progressing with to develop sustainable practice learning for our future students and workforce. I'm just going to hand over now to Thomas, who'll talk through this all in a bit more detail. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm going to share my screen. Super. So thank you, Chloe, who's kindly given us an insight into the HEE's wider view on the direction of travel for AHP students in practice learning. For those of you that don't know me, so my name is Thomas Ince, and I am the AHP practice learning lead here at the university. And I work alongside our AHP practice learning leads, nursing and social work colleagues to ensure that we're providing an adequate and diverse number of opportunities for our students here at LSBU. I'm going to provide you with a brief overview of our AHP practice learning strategy over the next coming year or so, before handing over to Gwyn and some of our physiotherapy students to talk through some of our more innovative models. I want to share with you this quote, which I've nabbed off the HEE website, said by Stuart Norton, which sums up the importance of practice learning and being part of an AHP course. So as well as students learning the actual clinical skills of that profession, it's also important to learn some of those other skills whilst on placement. So that might include the organisational discourse, the culture, the professionalism, really so that our students can go on to become well-rounded professionals with the skills that employers are seeking. And innovative approaches to practice learning will help ensure that this is not a barrier to increasing our student population and to training well-rounded graduates as part of the people plan. So my mission in my role, my first mission is to look at practice learning expansion across our different AHP courses. The first reason for that is to reduce the risk of placement shortfalls, and secondly, to expand some of our AHP programs in order to meet the needs of the NHS People Plan, and that includes programs such as diagnostic radiography. Finally, secondly, we want to ensure that these opportunities are of high quality through a multifactorial approach, and I'll talk through that in a minute. And finally, we would like to disrupt the status quo of institutionalized racism and colonialism with respect to practice learning. And I'll be presenting on this separately with Mish in a bit. So with regards to AHP practice learning expansion, we'd like to ensure that at least one of the pillars of practice is included within each practice learning opportunity. These pillars of practice contain common elements that are applicable to all our practitioners. So they include, firstly, clinical practice, and this will be the most common area where our students are going to be placed. This is so that they can provide safe, effective, and person-centered care, and also begin to learn and clinically reason the professional judgments and decision-making around the role. In addition to that, we're exploring some of the other elements of the pillars of practice. So that includes facilitation of learning, which may focus and centre around projects such as teaching, assessment, and creation of new learning environments. We want to look at leadership, and that's something we've been doing significantly over the last few months, so that we can support the development of teamwork skills, as well as professional and organisational leadership. And finally, we want to include evidence and research-based placements. This is so that we can get our students interested and involved in research at an early stage, so that we can build clinicians that have an evidence-centered approach. We also want to take advantage of the diverse and virtual opportunities that have come about from the COVID-19 pandemic. So alongside the pillars of practice, we've been looking at a number of different strategies across our different AHP programs. So for example, our ODPs, they have shown amazing versatility during the pandemic, and they've been able to work not only in operating theatres, but also within A&Es and ICUs and HDU settings. So we've been exploring how these other settings can accommodate ODP students. We currently are working with HEE and a number of different providers to support physiotherapy students within osteopathy clinics, and they're currently on placement there now. As Mark has mentioned, we've had a number of students based at our vaccination centres in southwest London, and they've been supporting our workforce to immunise the population. And finally, LSBU has been awarded £240,000 to support virtual and peer-enhanced e-placement opportunities across nursing, ODP, physiotherapy, and occupational therapy, so that we can begin to explore how these opportunities can work. And we've just been designing a simulation practice learning developer role within the organisation. So basically what I'm trying to say is that there are endless possibilities out there with regards to practice learning, especially in physiotherapy. So I see it very much like this fruity machine on the left-hand side. So lots of lights and buttons and whistles to press. So we're trying to take all the opportunities that have been made available by HEE, by Twitter, and by various forums, and narrowing that down into a more focused approach, such as this lock here on the right. And that focused approach might look something like this. So for example, we may have an offer from a governing body. So for example, the CSP or the College and Society of Radiography. So that main pillar of practice will be leadership, and that will be our primary focus. The model of supervision may be a 2-to-1 model, so 2 students to 1 educator, and the modality for that placement might be virtual. Once we begin to develop templates around these areas, it will become easier and easier to reproduce these placements. And we've created a leadership handbook and are in the process of developing a research handbook with occupational therapy. Another model might be an emerging role setting, such as a prison. And that pillar of practice will be role emerging, with potentially a long arm supervision model from the university. And that modality may be fixed, or it may be one-to-one. It will be one-to-one. We have been and continue to want to collaborate with our HEI colleagues and provider organisations to ensure we get the best possible outcome for our students. And we've been doing this through a number of different forums, such as the Placement Club and Masterclass, through the HEI forums, through the London and South East Placement Partnership, and also in physiotherapy through the London Physiotherapy Placement Group. And we want to expand that net more widely. So we want to engage more closely with the local community, and we've ensured that we have an LSBU representative at each one of our AHP faculties across London. With physiotherapy and occupational therapy, we've got close links with our placement management partnership program, and also with the HCPC and HEE. So expanding practice learning mustn't come at the expense of quality. And our strategy is firstly to ensure that we are offering our students a range of patient and non-patient facing opportunities that are reflective of the pillars of practice and the contemporary programme we have at LSBU. And these are measured on a student profiling system. Each practice learning site has placement agreements in place to ensure that students are being well supported by trained educators, as well as LSBU and the placement site understanding their obligations. We are also in the midst of reviewing our quality monitoring situation and student feedback so that we can begin to make material changes based on the feedback we receive across our AHP courses. In all of our AHP courses, we want to support training for our educators. So, for example, in physiotherapy, this is organised through the London Physiotherapy Placement Group, and they run regularly at various universities. And that looks at the role of the practice educator, how to plan and prepare for students, looking at the assessment paperwork, and exploring strategies so that we can support students with additional needs. In addition to this, we're exploring how we can include anti-racism and allyship training as part of our programme of support for practice educators. So thank you. That's it from me. I'm going to hand over to Gwyn and some of our students to talk about some of the models that we've used in physiotherapy.
Okay, good afternoon and thank you. It's absolutely delightful to be here and to see so many names that are familiar on the chat. And I just need to say a huge thank you before I start, actually, for everybody's support for the programme over the past year in particular. As Claire's already said, it's been what we are about to present, because there's myself here, and also I'm delighted, absolutely chuffed, to be joined by a cohort of students who are currently out on placements at the Royal National Orthopaedic Hospital on a leadership and quality enhancements placement. So what we're going to do between us is to give you a flavour of some of the silver lining that comes from the black COVID cloud. So some of the examples of how we have benefited, if you like, and how we have used the opportunities that are emerging as a result of COVID to actually build placement capacity, and more importantly, possibly to think about the future workforce. And that's where I'd like to start, I guess, is thinking about the future of physiotherapy. So wanting to draw us back to the physiotherapy framework, a document that was created back in 2011. What this document did was to actually think about where physiotherapy was headed for the next 10 years and to draw out some of the vision of what physiotherapy, what the opportunities that were available to us then. I guess those opportunities haven't changed, they've just expanded actually. So the words on the outside of this framework are still incredibly relevant, thinking about physiotherapy's role in educating. So whether that's the kind of educational role that I'm here at LSBU, an academic role, or whether we're thinking about educating patients, service users, prospective service users about what physiotherapy can offer them. Thinking about our role in leading services, leading strategy, leading policy, about our role as physiotherapy managers, again, whether that's case management, whether that's managing a physiotherapy service, whether it's managing one another, each other in that setting. We think about our role in supporting, so supporting patients, service users, supporting one another, supporting the interprofessional team of people working with clients and other people we work with. The role then of research, we've heard a bit about that already, and about evidence-centred practice, about the value and the importance, the significance of that, because if we are to continue to survive and thrive as a profession, then surely we need an evidence-based underpin what it is that we're doing, and to be questioning about why we're doing what we're doing. And finally, thinking about the clinical aspect, the all-important clinical aspect, person-centred practice. So again, whether that's with an individual person or whether we're thinking about it as a public health kind of perspective, kind of role. So that, I guess, is what frames our approach here at LSBU. It's something that the CSP, this is the document that we use to create curricula. It is also the document that is used, I guess, to develop job descriptions. So there's a connection here, I guess, between education and practice. And it's a really valuable tool to be starting to think, I think, about where placements are headed, where practice-based learning is going, because we are needing absolutely to create a workforce that is fit for the future. So because we have that outcomes-based approach with the framework, it creates possibilities. And this is our approach. We've been a programme probably in place for the last 3 years. And this is the approach that we've taken to looking at placements and students' profile. So again, there isn't anything, CSP says there isn't anything such as a core placement anymore. So what this matrix approach to placements is allowing us is for us to be responsive to the opportunities that are offered, but also recognising the need of the future workforce and thinking then about more broadly about what can count, if you like, as a placement. So wanting to ensure, yes, of course, We need to ensure that a student has got cardiorespiratory musculoskeletal, but where that happens, how that happens is really also as important, so that we give somebody an opportunity to experience a ward-based practice, a community practice, working at the interface of practices, technology enabled practice as well as non-clinical, and also then thinking about the pace of practice. So how a slower paced practice, maybe in a community, that's my clinical background, so I can say things like that, versus something in a very fast-paced practice, either on an interface or in a very acute ward. So thinking about creating those opportunities so that students themselves recognise where their strengths are, and we scaffold that in a way that the student then can continue to grow, thrive and develop. So that, I guess, is our approach and our vision, and what we've been seeing over the past, well, 6 months in particular, but longer, is the value and the importance of critical conversation, collaboration and creativity. That's how we go about growing and releasing, I think, placement capacity. And what's important here is not just about placement capacity per se, but thinking about the sustainability of it. And how it is that we can continue to grow that this placement can continue to thrive if that's what the need of the workforce is. So enough from me. What I'd really dearly like to do is to introduce you to our 3 students, because they are the stars of the show as far as I'm concerned. And I'm sure you want to hear from them far more than you do from me, and I don't blame you in the least. So we have 3 students with us today. There's Shireen Byron and Emma Turner, who are both second-year students on the MSc Pre-Reg programme here at LSBU. And then we have Daniel Ling, who is a final year on the BSc programme here at LSBU as well. And as I say, they're on a placement at the minute that we're establishing with the RNOH. It's looking at quality improvement and leadership. So it came from one of those critical conversations about, well, what sorts of opportunities were there out in that particular placement site for looking at this kind of offer. So it was building on work we'd already done previously. And what I'd like to do is to ask students a series of questions. And there will be obviously some time at the end of the session for more questions, because I'm sure you will have some. So if I can start, I think, with Emma. And what I'd like you to do there is to tell me about your present placement. What is the placement like? What sort of things are you doing? How does it work in practice?
Yeah, so like Gwen said, we're currently on a quality improvement project placement at the RNOH. And this placement is focused around finding ways to improve patient quality of life and understand their experience while they're waiting on the long orthopedic list. This placement is mainly virtual, and so we spend most of our time doing research, researching and understanding patient pathways. And we've also been able to be exposed to patient and public involvement in a practical sense, because tomorrow we're actually interviewing and having a discussion forum with patients virtually. So that would be really interesting tomorrow to get their to understand their experience and get some ideas from them, obviously, because they know best about what they want. And yeah, so during the placement, we have daily catch-ups with our educator. So that's where we can share ideas, show what we've learned through the day, and just keep us on track, and we can ask him questions if we need to. We as a 4, so there's another student on the placement as well, we usually have daily catch-ups together to just talk about the placement and areas that we're struggling with, so we can help each other out. And then weekly, we have mentoring sessions with the placement. And we also have action learning sessions with Tom, who is our university link tutor. And so they're both like sessions where we can share our experiences, reflect, and sort of, yeah, it's just, it's very supported in that way, where we get a lot of catch-ups with different people in the team, and we get to sort of be exposed to different people as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Emma. And it's really interesting hearing you talk about that service user involvement. So I can see immediately how this particular placement would inform the content of the IPL portfolio that you're needing to submit, because one of the elements of that, am I right, in thinking, is around policy context and service user involvement. So I can see immediately there's a natural crossover there. And it's interesting, again, to think about the action learning, because I think that's something that we've been introducing for the past 6 months into the design of placements, whether they're virtual or not, recognising some of the challenges of being a student on a placement in the middle of a pandemic. So actually having a space where people can come together to actually offload if they need. And it was interesting talking to a colleague, Ruth Kent, who's another of the academic team this morning, and we were just kind of reflecting whether actually the value of knitting in action learning into any placement, actually, whether it was virtual or not, whether it was more of a traditional type placement potential for doing that kind of stuff. Okay, thank you, Emma. Shireen and Dan, have you got anything that you would like to add from your perspective at all about the placement experience in the net?
I don't know if you want to go first, Dan, and then I'd follow.
Yeah, okay. So I'll just like to add, it's sort of, it's evolved really as to, you know, how it's come through. But I've never been on a placement with other students at all, and I'm still not in lots of ways because we're all in our own houses. But at the same time, the sort of things that Emma has mentioned about us having catch-ups, there's lots of time to be with them online, and you can still be really supportive of each other. And I think actually in some of the reflections from last week, the four of us have worked really well as a team remotely, and have taken advantage of the communication you can do online, WhatsApp groups, etc., to get through and have, you know, build up a work list and delegate and do it. So even though it is a virtual, I'm still feeling that sort of team experience, even though I'm not on site with the other people.
Fantastic, thank you. Shireen?
I agree with everything that Dan and Emma both said, and I think it's really going to shape us for the future when going into our Band 5 physios. It's not going to be long now, because it's been a different type of placement in the sense of managing your own time and making sure you get, even though you have to do that practically anyway, but a different type of managing your time in virtually and being involved with patients in a different aspect of doing like public patient involvement. I haven't done that with previous placements. So I think we've gained a lot of insight into what happens on the wards. And I think it's really going to help us in the future.
Thank you. Thanks for that. So if I move on to my next question, I'm sort of thinking here about, it's a non-traditional placement, if you like. I hate to use that because what is a traditional placement? But let's, for a minute, a non-traditional placement. So what were your expectations of this placement? I think, Dan, you were going to take this question first, weren't you?
Yeah, it's interesting because the actual placement kind of had almost sort of slow reveal sort of to it, because initially, apologies, timing there of the dogs coming in. That's throwing me. What was I saying? So, yeah, so to begin with, the initial information I got from PMP was that it was going to be 3 days practical, normal placement, as it were, and then 2 days doing a project. And I kind of thought, oh, project, yeah, that could be interesting, that would be good. What will that be? And then as over the weeks it evolved, and we were told, okay, it's going to be almost all virtual, with only a few days going in on placement. And I guess my first thought was a bit disappointed. It's like, well, no patients, we're not going to be seeing patients. This is strange. What will I be doing? And it's a pattern. You know the pattern of placements. You know that there's going to be an induction, some shadowing. You're gradually going to build up and do it. But I didn't know what we were going to be doing from day to day of this placement. So it did change. And I was kind of thinking, well, I've got no expectations, so I've no idea what we're walking into. Sorry, I'm going to have to go to the door. My apologies. Hold on.
So I don't know whether Emma and Shireen gone.
Yeah, I'll follow on from that really. Yeah, I think we just didn't really know what was going to happen. But the placement itself was very transparent in giving us a sort of timetable about when we're going to have meetings. They were all pre-scheduled in. And then the spaces around where we weren't on site, or we had to work from home, that's when we sort of every week and every day we sort of built up exactly what we needed to do in that time. And I think it's a learning curve as well, when the fact that you don't necessarily know exactly what you're going to do, and every day is a new day, and you're going to have different tasks, which is very similar to if you're going to go onto a ward. So there's definitely a skill there that's transferable, and sort of having that autonomy over what you might be doing that day and how you personally can develop and use that time wisely.
And thank you for your honesty there. And I think what that speaks volumes is of the flexibility of your cohorts, actually. So we did, I think, as part of practice placement preparation, talk about, we need to be responsive to the changing demands in practice. This was in the midst of the COVID pandemic, but actually the value of taking that approach. And I think there's still some work, and it will be good to be able to work with you guys to think about, so how do we better prepare students for that uncertainty and that outcomes-based approach? Because that's what I hear you describing, is thinking about, well, okay, I've got this day spread ahead of me, or a week spread ahead of me. Here are the objectives. What do I need to put in place with support to be able to address those outcomes? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Are you okay, Dan? Is everything? Yeah. Is there anything else you would like to add?
Not at that point for the sort of my expectations. I think I've covered everything I need to say. Thank you. Apologies for that.
Yeah. Okay. No, not at all. It's glad you're all right. So then you're talking very much about the future. So how this placement connects to where you're going in the future. So I'm just kind of mindful, would like to give you a space to talk about that, about the links from this placement maybe to the next placement, and then graduation, because that's, as Shireen has already said, it's not far off, is it?
I think that we've been able to look at different aspects of delivering quality care to patients, because we're not on the wards, or we're able to get a bit more of an understanding of how patients are feeling, how effective their care has been, and then what we can do to give them a better experience in their future. So I think, we're a lot more aware of, implementing quality care, and what we can do to better make sure that people have better patient-centered care. Yeah.
Thank you. Emma and Dan, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, it's my perceptions of being in after sort of being halfway through it have changed. And I was thinking, a project, not patients. How is that going to help me become a physio? But actually, then seeing it as a great opportunity. That yes, of course, you need to learn how to see patients, and probably 5 out of my 6 placements will be patient facing. But the opportunity to have access to do the sort of leadership, quality improvement don't really won't really come along when doing the job, maybe for a few years. So to get that opportunity early on, experience of that, but also the access to people. So our clinical educator is the director of the AHP for the whole hospital. So just having that one-to-one with him on a daily basis is a great opportunity. Other people in the hospital, we're dealing with sort of band 7 levels and things, and a mixture of research and clinical basis. We're getting their input. They've got a previous experience with PPI involvement as well. So it's a great sort of opportunity really to get an insight into how a different side of it is running, the non-patient facing side, as it were. And I think really for us as well, it's a real, makes us stand out from the crowd on our CV that we've done something like this, and lots of transferable skills for going through for the future. Yeah.
Thank you. Emma, is there anything else you would like to bring?
Yeah, I guess on a personal level, I've always loved research, and so the research aspect of this placement is something I never expected to have over the placement. So personally, for me, thinking about where I want to end up, I would love to be in that sort of end of field or integration into that side of physio. So I never, like I said, I never really thought I'd get the experience. So it's been a nice exposure for me. And yeah, like the others have said, there's transferable skills there that you wouldn't necessarily think until you're on it. Definitely with the autonomy and sort of having to work your own schedule, and then quality care side of things, like Shireen has said, like it all comes into practice, just not in the way that you would traditionally think it is. That's my thought.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all so much, actually, because what I'm hearing you talk about is how those kind of opportunities potentially open your eyes to help them look at physiotherapy differently. So hidden bits of practice, if you like, actually making them visible and celebrating them in order then to think about, well, actually, that could be potentially a career opportunity. So if we think about the future of the workforce and where physiotherapy is headed generally, then actually, yeah, it feels like a huge privilege as a part of a physiotherapy program to be able to offer that. And it comes back then to thinking about, well, thank you to the placement providers for making that opportunity available and supporting us to do that. So I bet that there'll be loads and loads and loads and loads of questions for you. So I hope you will hang around with us, won't you, for the rest of the session, and to answer those questions from the audience, because as I say, I'm sure they want to hear more from you than they do from me. But thank you for your contribution. So just moving forward then with the rest of what I'm needing to wanted to say. I guess it's thinking about that collaboration and the support that we can offer to make some of that develop, but the sustainability of it. And this is an example of some of the resources we're starting to develop online for our practice educators, whether that's existing ones or new ones. And I guess it's trying to showcase, I suppose, some of the resources and the links that Mark was talking about in his presentation. So thinking about the information that's available from the HCPC, from the professional bodies, and HEE is also, Chloe, on this little Padlet, the resource links to the resources that Chloe was talking about, but also recognising the benefits of becoming a practice educator or getting involved in practice-based learning for individuals as career development, so as CPD. So seeing the, facilitating, helping another person learn and develop is actually potentially learning and developing for me as well, and learning and development for the organisation. So seeing those kind of links, and that's, I guess, one example of what this resource is doing. As Tom has already mentioned, we also offer support education for our educators And I guess what I'm really keen that we start to look at LSBU around practice placements is how we develop communities of practice. So academic team, our students, our practice providers, our educators, and how we create those spaces, which is why today is so special, actually, because it's giving us a space to start to have some of those critical conversations so that we can start to recognise where one another's needs are, what the opportunities might be in order then to develop that capacity in a way that's meaningful for everybody involved. So I've nothing more to say other than a huge thank you. Thank you to our students, but also thank you to you as audience for supporting our placements and us as a programme. So I'm going to hand back to Tom, I think, for the minute. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Gwyn, Emma, Dan, and Shireen. It's great to hear some of your the perspectives of the leadership placement. So I'm going to now share my screen with you as this is the last set of slides that we're going to be presented today before we move on to our question and answer session. So I'm going to be presenting alongside Mish, who's going to introduce herself very shortly, the AHP Plus anti-racism practice learning strategy here at LSBU. And I'm very pleased and proud to present this to you and demonstrate the journey of collaboration and co-production that we've gone through. Just to initially start, that this presentation has been a piece of a wider piece of work around our strategy, and the presentation has been co-produced by Cheryl Tayson, who's one of our AHP students, myself, Almu Fernandez Alonso, who's another AHP student, Dr. Anita Atwell, who's an associate professor of allied health, and of course Mish, and I will let her introduce herself.
Hello everyone, welcome. My name is Mish Ahmed Landiyu. I'm an occupational therapy lecturer, but 2 days a week I'm a student success and anti-racist education practitioner. Thank you.
So just to start us off, I got a quote here from the senior leadership team at LSBU, who issued a statement back in June of 2020 following the murder of George Floyd to show the solidarity for the Black and minoritized ethnic community that we have here at LSBU. And that includes our students, teachers, alumni, and staff. And they have ensured that we are that LSBU is focused on equalising the opportunities that we provide here at LSBU, and that very much includes practice learning.
So I'm going to provide a bit of a background journey to where we are right now at present with the placement learning group. So let me take you to 9th of March 2015. A young man called Chimani Maxwell, postgrad student of the University of Cape Town, walked to the center of the campus where the statue of imperialist and colonial politician Cecil Rhodes stood, and tipped a bucket of feces on top of the statue. Now, this one act sent ripples across the higher education institutes globally, and students started to ask questions such as, why is my professor not Black? Why is my teaching team white? And they felt that this was affecting their learning and university experiences, and potentially they felt it could be disadvantaging those who are wanting to come to university. Now, the Black Lives Matter movement started before May 2020, when George Floyd was murdered. It started in 2013 after the acquittal of George Zimmerman in the shooting death of African-American teen Trayvon Martin. It started socio-political discussions regarding the structures and institutions continuing the status quo of race and health inequality. Institutional racism is not a new term. It was raised in the writings of Carmichael and Stokely during the 60s civil rights movements in the US. It is how the policies, practices and processes enable and embolden decisions, actions and behaviour of one group of people, usually from an ethnicity racialised as white, to marginalise, discriminate, other, oppress and disadvantage another group, usually from minoritised or marginalised groups. After the murder of George Floyd, statements came from AHP professional bodies, which were received as platitudes for inaction, and some made ineffective reactionary actions. Due to Chumani's Act, the campaign for the statue's removal received global attention. It led to a wider movement to decolonise education across the globe. For example, for AHP, it was asked to look at interview practices and processes, as most of our AHP teaching staff are majority racialised as white. Our AHP literature and role models are mostly racialised as white. This has a knock-on effect on placement processes, practice and experiences. Decolonising the curriculum is placing a critical lens that is showing up the theme of continuing status quo of inequality and inequity in education that graduating students recycle into practice. Hence, decolonising the curriculum is encouraging collaborative discussions on these topics to enable strategies to be put in place to explicitly and effectively equalise the playing field. And a large part of the AHP curriculum is placement learning, so decolonising placement is very relevant. At LSBU, we have collaborated with AHP students and staff and convened 2 safe spaces to have discussions, gain support and advice. These are 2 affinity groups, Race and Cultural Equity Group, RACE-G, for students and staff who identify as racialised as BME, and Allyship and Cultural Equity Group, ACE-G, for students and staff who racialise as white. It has a flattened hierarchy. All who attend come to the table as equals. These 2 groups feed into the policies, practices and processes in AHP, and hence also for the AHP Plus Practice Learning project that Tom is leading. Affinity groups are intended to bring people together over a commonality such as their identity. 2 stories from the affinity groups regarding racism on placement were shared with Tom, which kick-started the formation of the anti-racism, anti-discrimination strand within the AHP Plus Practice Learning setup. Again, affinity groups have been around a while in the workplace to provide a safe space to gain support and advice, to raise concerns. They have also been found to help with confidence and career progression in the workplace and promote good team working. Hence, it is hoped that these groups, in collaboration with Tom's Practice Learning Group, aspire to support to improve the experiences for students, university staff, and clinical partners involved in placement learning. Next slide, please. So what started as an informal subgroup has realised into a formal strand for the AHP Plus Learning Innovation Project led by Tom, a anti-racism, anti-discrimination, anti-oppression strand. The mission statements align with the ethos of proaction, collaboration, disruption of the status quo of inequality, which will benefit everybody. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Mesh. It's so powerful. So I'm now going to talk about a little bit about my journey as an ally since I've been at LSBU. For those of you that know me, you'll know that I'm a doer, and I'm always keen to get stuck in. So when I heard 2 powerful stories of racism whilst on practice learning placement opportunities from RACE-G, I knew that I wanted to act, I wanted to do something. So I knew that we had to start setting up an AHP practice learning anti-racism strategy. And I knew that we needed to get student involvement as well as providers and other people. So I quite naively went straight ahead and I was like, right, we're going to have some events, we're going to get people's thoughts, we're going to get people's opinions. And I really wanted to get into the swing of action. Now, in the lead up to these events, I got some input from clinical educators and some input from providers, but right up until the event, I'd had no students from a BME background come forwards to talk about their experiences with me on a stakeholder event type forum, and I had to cancel the event. And then following that, I felt, you know, huge disappointment that I felt that I'd got this wrong and that it wasn't going to be successful. However, with further discussions with Nish and Nita, I had realised that I hadn't created a safe enough environment for a lot of those conversations to happen, and that's how we gained this lesson structure, which is we're going to look at in the next slide. And then following the cancellation of the stakeholder events, I had about 7 or 8 students from a BME background approach me on email and MS Teams who wanted to discuss how they could be part of the movement, about how they could contribute effectively to what we were trying to do. So there was a good outcome from those cancelled AHP anti-racism stakeholder events, but not in the way that I thought there was going to be. And ensuring that we have a safe space for our BME students and our those people that racialize as black or from a minoritized ethnic community is essential within LSBU. So that's just some of the learning I wanted to share with you as an ally.
So the diagram shows the interconnectedness between the affinity groups, RACE-G and ACE-G, the anti-racism, anti-discrimination and anti-oppression subgroup, and the main AHP plus practice learning group. So any topics and issues raised in the affinity groups regarding placement, they can be brought to the subgroup to discuss further in relation to policy, processes in practice and potential actions. This can then be taken to the wider group for larger collaborative discussions and to start the process of agreed change, and vice versa, hence the double-headed arrow. The relationships between groups will be collaborative, not consultative. We are hoping that this will grow an increasing collective to enable change in policy, process, practice, and research for practice learning for the benefit of all. We appreciate this is a long-term vision and that change now is the starting journey of change action. Next slide, please.
So this is our model of action and engagement. So we would like action and student engagement and empowerment to run in parallel with each other, whilst also interconnecting, almost like a rope, as Gwyn would say, that they make each other stronger as they move forwards. So we hope that as we start to create actions with the students that we do have involved, we would then, once some of our AHP students begin to see those actions and change happening, they will become more empowered to begin to join us and support our change. So I bet you're wondering what our changes are or what we would like to do and our routes of engagement. So we've got to make sure our actions are supported by a community of learning, collaborative conversations, and reviewing current practice and policies. So firstly, our first action is we want to be a critical friend when reviewing policies, and we're doing that at the moment, especially with our complaints policy here at LSBU for the next academic year, and ensuring that it encompasses practice learning and racism as part of that. We want to provide members with the opportunity to learn and gain greater understanding from each other as we grow as representatives of LSBU and the wider system. And we want to develop a shared AHP ethos and network among practice learning needs with respect to anti-racism and allyship. We want to co-produce and agree a campaign umbrella that we can all come underneath at LSBU. We want to agree and collaborate on terminology that we use in RACE-G, AHG, and the practice learning subgroup and original group, so that in accordance with best practice guidelines, as the term BAME can be offensive to some of our students and staff. And we want to advise on the anti-racism strategy with regards to training and education for our personal tutors and link tutors, especially around microaggressions, understanding privilege, and there's one thing, and learning to grow as we move forwards. I'm going to hand over to Mish.
So the next set of actions are to support and advise the strategy for the inclusion of anti-racism and allyship training for all personal tutors to enhance their ability to support students when on practice placement and to collaborate effectively with all stakeholders. Another action to establish networks with RaceG and AceG to collaborate with common areas of interest where the opportunity arises. And the last action to showcase role models from the Black and minoritized ethnic communities through invitation to speak with all students at AHP at LSBU. Next slide, please.
So here are some of the resources that we've used to help develop our strategy so far. And we're happy to share this presentation after the event. And we hope to continue talking, learning and growing as we move forwards with our AHP practice learning strategy. That is the end of our formal presentation. So we welcome any questions and we look forward to having a Q&A session with you very shortly.
Give me 2 seconds. I am just changing the view so the audience can see all of us together. Perfect. Thank you very much, everyone. We are going to go over to questions. Just a reminder to our audience, if you have any questions, you are very welcome to pop them in the Q&A box. We've got quite a bit of time for questions, so hopefully we can get around to all of them. And you can upvote on the questions you most want answered by clicking the thumbs up symbol, and that boosts them to the top. And I can see that people have been doing that already. So, and we're going to go over to our first question, which is from Jane. With students not doing the placements that were considered more traditional, and perhaps students have less acute experience, how are the higher education institutions supporting trusts to ensure that they do not place students under disadvantage when it comes to interviews, that they may still be more biased towards clinical experience in specific areas? Equally, in providing the right support when an individual starts work so it doesn't feel overwhelming. Who would like to tackle that first, and just indicate to me if you'd like to answer it? And Thomas, I'm obviously going to go over to you as default.
I know I have an opinion, a thought on this, and I know Gwyn has a thought on this as well. We've discussed this quite a lot. I'll just add first of all, so we would like to, so I come from a community physiotherapy background, so I don't have much acute experience in acute hospitals myself. So the NHS long-term plan is firstly focused on care close to home. So we're very much focused on providing a contemporary physiotherapy approach that meets the needs of all the pillars of practice. With regards to interviews, so at a band 5 stage with new with students coming into the workforce, I hope you don't mind me saying that it's very difficult to differentiate between one new graduate compared to another new graduate. And we're hopefully creating more employability for our students by giving them opportunities in leadership and research so that they can showcase to future employers that they have skills in those specific areas. We hope that each of the individual trusts will be supporting their new graduates through preceptorship programs so that they're learning the skills within their specific areas. And with regards to the specifics of like job descriptions and things like that, I hope we're slowly moving away from the idea of having you need to have had clinical experience in respiratory, musculoskeletal, neurology, and moving towards a more transferable skills approach with regards to job descriptions. Gwyn, do you want to carry on that?
Yeah, just to add that you'll have seen from our profile map that I would absolutely be wanting to ensure that students have had an acute experience. Now, whether that's a neurology flavour or a musculoskeletal trauma orthopedic flavour or a respiratory, it may be a number of different things. If we think about the pace of practice, so needing to be able to handle fast-paced practice as well as slow-paced practice, and have had that experience in an acute setting as well as in a non-acute setting, that's something that we take great care to do, and it's something that bothers me as a, if you like, as a practice placement lead for those very reasons, because we need to ensure that students have been exposed to that variety. So that's, I guess, I hope, reassuring. The other thing that we do is to help students, and I hope that you've heard our students this afternoon talk about the transferability of behaviours, knowledge and skills from one setting to another. So again, that's something that would continue, I hope, into their, once graduated, to be able to say, well, do you know what, I've not been to intensive care, but I have had experience of working in a fast-paced setting with people with respiratory conditions that look like this in this particular setting over here. So being able to evidence, if you like, how they're able to meet the demands or the requirements of a practice in a particular setting with a particular group of clients in a way that is meaningful and looks beyond the label of placements, of practice as well. So yeah, again, I don't know whether any of my colleagues as part of their teaching would like to add anything to that. But to say, thank you for asking that question. It's an old chestnut, and I think is something that we need to continue having those conversations with, so that we're not disadvantaging, if you like, the students, the programme and the workforce of the future. So it's how we create that kind of future-facing practitioner that is flexible, that is adaptable, but that can also meet the demands of now and the future.
Thank you, Gwyn. Sorry, yes, Thomas?
No, I was just going to say, I think Chloe wants to add to that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, you know, I think the students that are on placement at the moment are having a really unique experience, being placed in a huge variety of different settings that they wouldn't have ordinarily had the opportunity necessarily to be placed in. And I think there's a real learning and a real kind of development from this in terms of professional and personal development, but also thinking, I think one of the concerns is not necessarily having the hands-on or the practical opportunity on placement, and maybe having a tech or an online or virtual or kind of, you know, one of those newer models of placement. But actually, if we think about how clinical services are working and moving at the moment, that's a real advantage to be able to have had the opportunity to have worked in that way. Whereas, you know, the students that we've got now that are on placements are learning with the clinicians who are doing the work. So, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if lots of our kind of interview questions and our different ways of working moving forwards are actually changing and developing towards some of these new approaches, as we know the NHS is having some rapid changes at the moment in response to the pandemic. So I think some of these new placement ideas will be really supportive for the way that the NHS is developing at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next question is from Katrina, who asks, with both the traditional and non-traditional placements, is there an expectation and an advantage of having all levels of educators? We are currently struggling to convince our Band 7s in some areas that they are able to provide a comprehensive and valuable placement experience.
Gwen, I know you feel passionately about this, shall I let you go?
Thank you. And again, if we turn to the CSP here, because the CSP would argue that it's everybody's job to offer a placement to support practice-based learning, regardless of grade. And I would argue that Band 7s are massively valuable. What I can also understand is that they're juggling stuff, because they've got education, they've got clinical practice and expertise, and they might be doing some strategic development work as well. And I guess my argument with the Band 7s is maybe about seeing it as CPD for their own development, but maybe also looking at team models of practice placement, so that you're not just placed with a Band 7 and that's it, but that you're part of team of educators working together that includes Band 7s. And it's how you blend that kind of mix. I can think about my own practice in community peds way back in the dark ages. I remember we made the case for having a student on placements in the community in PEDS. We were all band 7s, old money. It was what we called senior ones in old money. But actually could see the value of that, not only for the service and thinking about the wanting to encourage and attract future workforce into community paediatric practice. That was a bit of a Cinderella at the time, but also thinking about it in terms of our own professional development and being able to get feedback about the quality of our practice, about the quality of our communication, our ability to work with families and children, etc., etc., etc. So I know there are some resources on CSP's website that talk about the benefits, the value of becoming a practice educator for in that kind of way. But I suppose it's also then thinking about what support needs to be put in place within the workforce of that band 7 to enable that band 7 to become that practice educator or part of a practice education team.
Absolutely. And I would just add that something that I've got another hat on. So one day a week, I'm a clinical manager in an intermediate care service in Southwark. Something that we've been trying to do quite extensively with our sort of 8s and 7s is that we create almost job roles for these students. So they have a place within the team so that they very much feel part of the team and actually have almost like a job description, but they're not a substantial member of staff, so that they have a role within the team around data collection for audits and other aspects of the clinical role, so that when they're not there, you miss them. So they've almost got a central part of the team that continues to run as we move forwards. And I don't know if any of the students want to talk about their educator.
Yes. So as I mentioned before, he's the clinical director of the AHP services. So he's I think sits at about an 8D level. He's able to spend an hour or so with us each day, which is great. But so we're seeing him sort of role modeling what it's like to be working at that level. We're getting an insight into his world and how busy he is and how to spare his time and his communication tips, presenting tips, that sort of high management level we're really gaining from. But I'd like to think that also he's gaining a bit from us as well, because he's been pretty honest with us and said that he had virtually no expectations of what we would know about PPI before we got there. That we're ahead of the curve on how quickly we pick things up. He expected us to pick things up quickly because we're coming towards the end of our programs, whether that's BSc or MSc. But he's been impressed with us, and I think that's part of the contemporary angle of the LSBU course that is unique. And I think we're good ambassadors in that sense for LSBU and going ahead. And also gives him an idea of actually what the new band of new swathe of band 5s are going to be like coming forward if they've been on this course. So actually it could shift the whole thing forwards by, rather than it's just always band 5s and 6 qualifying. He's in a position to actually change something further up about, perhaps you get more responsibility when you're coming on as a 5, or you get promoted more quickly, because he's seen the caliber of the sort of students that are going through these type of process.
Thank you. Shireen or Emma, would you like to come in? Shireen, I saw you nodding.
Yeah, I know. I just wanted to add that as well. Like, I agree with everything Dan said, and also I think it's helped with our confidence. I think when you're going in as a band 5 to speak to like a band 8, I feel so intimidated. But it's really helped me with like my confidence and bringing new ideas, and still just trusting in what you know and what you've learned. And I think he's really valued our ideas that we've brought to the team, and he's been surprised with what we know. So yes, that's been nice.
Thank you. Emma, is there anything you wanted to add? All good, all good. We'll stick with you because we've got another question for the three of you. Would the students be able to describe a typical day on placement, just to give a feel for how it works? Emma, we'll start with you if that's okay.
There isn't a typical day, I would say. I actually have a timetable here. So typically we start at 8, and for the first hour and a half, we're usually doing either admin, sort of our side, working on things, researching, that sort of thing. Then either we'll have a meeting together to start the day, or to sort of see what we're going to plan for the rest of the day, or we'll have a meeting with John, depending on, our practice educator, depending on his schedule. Then for the rest of the morning, sometimes we'll have a mentor session with the placement, or we'll have a meeting with Tom, our link tutor. So it just depends. Every day we'll have something in that space. Then we'll have a break for lunch, and then in the afternoon is usually where our catch-up sessions with our practice educator sit, to just catch up on the day. But then before that, sometimes it's research, sometimes we're on site, and have meetings together and work in that group setting. So it does vary. And then some days, I mean, last week we were able to shadow in the morning for about 3 hours. So yeah, it does vary. That's typically how the day goes. Early start, and then mid-afternoon finish.
Daniel and Shireen, is there anything you'd like to add?
I guess what's slightly, oh, sorry, go on.
No, you can go, Dan.
Slightly different about this one being project-based is that our dealing with patients is not as a patient, that we've been recruiting them for this PPI involvement, so effectively cold calling them and having to introduce ourselves, explain the project, sell it to them. So some of our job lists have been getting a sort of a little script together as to what we're going to say, how we're going to come across to them, recruiting them, getting them to sign up, agree, send them a follow-up email, invite them to a virtual event. What are our questions going to be? What's our presentation going to be? So there's a whole lot of other sort of planning communication that's involved with it, which is a different skill to if you're just rocking up at a bedside and communicating and doing that. But those skills we're fairly well practicing. This is a different type of communication. That's been quite a large part of our days and the build up to our PPI tomorrow.
Thanks, Shireen.
No, I was just going to say what Dan said. Yeah, so we've been doing a lot of the recruiting stuff for the PPIs, and I didn't really realise what all the work that went into it beforehand. But so that's been good.
Fantastic. Thanks, Shireen. We have a question for Chloe. What is being done either regionally or nationally by HEE to ensure that surplus offers placed to higher education institutions are notified to the placement provider at the earliest opportunity and matched offered to other HEIs? Currently in our trust, it's the placement coordinators who have to search through placement requests to match with similar dates when placement offers are not taken up, often at short notice, and this can be very time consuming and it's not always effective due to time constraints. Is there a strategy for looking at this regionally or nationally, e.g. having a central hub for surplus offers to be redirected? Bit of a long one.
Thank you, and thanks for the question. And I think it's also a good point to also say thanks for all the support that you're giving to students, and obviously the amount of placements that you're offering to be in a position where you have surplus. So a big thank you from that perspective as well. And I think this is a really complex area. Obviously, placements are managed in different ways in different universities, different regions, and so it is quite a complex picture to try and get a real handle on. Obviously at the moment within London, the majority of the universities are using PMP to manage their placements, and they are able to then kind of update and let other universities know if a placement hasn't been used or hasn't been allocated to. So hopefully that system enables placements to be used as much as possible, but we are aware that some placements unfortunately aren't used, and so trying to make the most of using every placement opportunity I think is a real key, particularly at the moment where we've got quite a large shortfall of placements. One of the things that we're also trying to do in London is make sure that placements are allocated 4 weeks at least 4 weeks prior to the placement starting, so that there is a bit more of a window of opportunity where if a placement isn't going to be used, that it can be transferred or offered to another university within the patch. I know it's a bit of a long-winded answer in terms of whether there's anything being done on a larger scale nationally. I think that would take an awful lot of coordination, but I'd definitely say watch this space. I think it's something that everyone's aware of as an issue, and I think as we have more and more of our practice education facilitators in post, anything to kind of support their role would definitely be useful. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Chloe. Natasha asks, do you think it would be possible / a good idea to make placements joint, e.g. clinical and non-clinical? For example, 2 weeks face-to-face on the ward experience and then a non-clinical research project with something relating to the ward experience they've had for the last few weeks. And I'll throw this out to whoever would like to take a stab.
Do you want me to take that? Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the question. And I guess it's thinking about how, offers are designed. So we've got experience of those split or hybrid kind of placement models. So whether that's kind of a block of learning in one setting and then followed by a block of learning in another, or actually whether the week is split across. So for instance, at the beginning of the year, we had a leadership placement that was happening in HDE and integrated care Southwark, so with Tom's team. And that was kind of 3 days in leadership and 2 days over in clinical practice in an intermediate care setting. The challenge there, I think, whether it's a block or a kind of split week, is about how to make the link, how to help the student recognise the connection between the learning that's happening in one space and the learning that's happening in the other, and also of the transparency of the assessment. So if I'm performing brilliantly, for instance, in one setting and not so great in another, then which marks from which section matter. So it's that outcomes-based approach, I think, is really, really valuable. And again, if we think about other examples I'm aware of, I'm aware that St George's, I think, did this probably about 3-4 years ago. The students out on placement in a GP practice. So this was when primary care was quite new, and half of the week there and half of the week with the outpatient department down the road. What was really interesting about that example was not just the students learning in placement, but of how it strengthened the relationships between the physiotherapy departments and the GP service. And the GP service actually being able to see the value of physiotherapy firsthand, because they were working with the student and because they were working with the educator to look at the assessment process. So I think there's potential benefits for all sorts of different models of supervision like that. It's, as I say, to the integrity of what the outcomes are for the design. How will that be assessed? How will that student know that they're progressing? How will the educators know that they're progressing? And how does then that connect back, plug back into the universities and the outcomes that we're delivering within a classroom-based setting? And that's where some of these conversations, I think, are really, really helpful in helping us look at how that actually happens in practice and how we best facilitate it, and what support do you need from us as educators in LSBU, for instance, to enable that to happen in practice so that it benefits everybody involved.
Thanks, Gwyn. Mark, did you want to come in there? You're just on mute at the moment.
There we go. Lovely. Sorry about that. I just wanted to add, Gwyn, to that. Also, most recently, we've held a vaccination hub placement, so obviously a response to COVID, with students going out onto these mass vaccination sites. But we've sort of really used that as an opportunity to teach around public health and well-being, so looking at population health, and also ergonomics, so looking at the human factors element. So with some of my background being in that, we've delivered some lectures and some sessions on ergonomics and how that may be applied. So in that example, although they were face-to-face with members of the public working with educators in that place, at the same time we were running some teaching, but also project work that they had to fulfill. So by the end of the 5 weeks, they presented back to us their interpretation of understanding the vaccination hub, understanding the complexities of it, how it runs, the ergonomics of that, the human factor elements, and then being able to make recommendations for how, if you like, the patient journey or member of the public journey works, how that fits together, how they integrate, how they worked with the multidisciplinary teams, how communication could be enhanced. So it was a really interesting project, a good opportunity to look at much wider issues that we often tackle in our education. So things like risk management, human factors and ergonomics, but also looking at the wider implications for public health. So again, a sort of a new innovative approach to placement.
Thank you, Mark. Natasha also asks, are you able to share the resources you have to prepare students for placements with hospitals to help us understand what has and what has not been covered? And this is something that I'll share with you all later when I share the Q&A box with the team, but that's something we can look into afterwards. Hayley asks, is it a good idea to have MSc and BSc students out on placement at the same time if we struggle to place all students?
I'm initially going to direct that question to Mark.
Okay, thank you. I think that fits in with obviously depending on cohort size, but I'm going to ask Gwen to sort of chip in if you need to, Gwen. But certainly what we have is this model where not all of our students are out on placement at the same time, as you can imagine, thinking about capacity and also the ability to learn. But certainly our students are able, both at operating sort of, if you like, MSc and BSc level, able to work together in many settings. Although the learning levels at level 6 and level 7 are taken into consideration, there is opportunity there. And at the same time, making sure that not all of our cohorts are out. So for example, at the moment, as we speak this afternoon, our year 2 BSc students are currently on, if you like, virtually working. So they are working and having sort of online teaching and practical sessions over at our campus. And at the same time, the BSc Year 3s are out on placement. So it does vary. We do split the cohorts, but it is divided across both the MSc and the BSc programme. And there is that opportunity for learning across cohorts, learning together, but also making sure that we're able to meet that capacity. Gwyn, would you add anything to that? Anything else about the complexities of that, or indeed the logistics?
Yeah, because what we would tend to be thinking about is the level of learning. So we have our final year students, the BSc and the MSc students are out at the same time. What that actually allows us is to optimise placement capacity. So thinking about geographical patch and the student's profile. So all the offers come in at level 6 and then we allocate according to that. It's a different issue for the middle year students. So the second year BSc, they're being assessed at level 5. The first year MSc are being assessed at level 6. So that creates tensions. And what I do as practice placement coordinator is where I can to avoid putting a level 6 student with a level 5 student, because that's really quite tricky. If you've got a 2-to-1 educator model, actually that's really tricky to manage. But if we've got, well, like the example of the RNOH placements, we've got Dan, who's from the BSc programme, and then we've got Shireen, Emma, and I think Rashida appeared a minute ago. They're all from the MSc programme, but they're all being assessed at level 6. So yeah, I can understand where the question is coming from, but just to reassure you that we do give quite careful consideration to which students we put together, so that we don't create additional work or additional tension where we can possibly avoid it. Sometimes we can't predict how students are going to be together on placements, and sometimes, yeah, it doesn't always work. but we do our best to make that magic work where we can.
Thanks, Gwyn. Thanks, Mark. Mish and Thomas, I'd like to come over to you for some questions, if that's okay. Amy asks, is the anti-racism strategy being incorporated into practice educator training / updates?
Such a good question. Mish, how would you like to play it?
We can do a double act, can't we, on this one? So, I mean, the innovation group that Tom has formed and is really working on finding out what are the needs of all the stakeholders and how we proceed. And this is an anti-racism, anti-discrimination, anti-oppression subgroup. So we are looking at how do we work with this on a realistic level, and education is key as a starting point. Everybody needs education. We need to start to understand what does this mean and what does it look like and what are the examples. And we know our social work partners are ahead of the game in this, so we will be collaborating with them and having conversations with them. And Tom is doing something at the moment, which I'll let Tom talk about.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So we are committed to providing anti-racism and allyship training for our link tutors, personal tutors, and practice educators. How that looks, we're not totally certain on it yet. What we know we do not want it to be is tokenism. We want it to be a long-term sustainable change of action. With regards to practice educators, yes, we want to include it as part of our practice education that we do at LSBU. However, so we know that there's some wider pieces of work going on. So for example, there's a piece of work with Health Education England around providing allyship and anti-racism training to our practice educators. However, it's paused at the moment, and the timeline for that is about 12 to 18 months, which is too long for us, we think. So we want to pilot something, we want to try something here. So we're very keen to do that and put that in place. We've got to be mindful that it's not tokenism and that it does make a material change with regards to action moving forwards. We'll keep you posted. And as Mish said, sorry, I was just going to, as Mish said, we have been engaging with a number of external agencies, and we've got some money that we're able to use to make that work. So we're in the process of it at the moment.
Yeah, we're being proactive and not reactive. We're really being considered how we're going to do this. And like Tom said, it's a long-term vision. It's about embedding good stuff.
Thanks. You said kind of like how the waiting list for that support is kind of like, you know, sounds like quite a long waiting list. So how can practice placements support students racialized as BME in the meantime? Kind of what's a good place to start as an instant starting block now? Just some kind of tips and advice.
I think when they come to practice education, they can start posing that question within that forum, because there might be also educators already doing some good stuff. We have some advice as well that can come up organically in response to questions that come up specifically to certain aspects of that. So I think the starting point is to ask and to inquire and be curious. That's the starting point.
Thanks, Mish. Thomas, is there anything you'd like to
add? Nothing to add from me.
Thank you. By focusing on students racialized as BME, are we separating them further?
I can answer that. I think isn't it usual practice to try and meet the needs of certain groups, to focus in on them and identify with them what are the needs. I mean, we did this for the women we did this for certain conditions or diagnoses, because it helps us identify what is needed and put in the equitable adjustments that are really going to help. I don't know what the students think about that.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't affect me directly, but I can see that that the world is not a level playing field, and some people need a hand up to make it more level, and that's fine by me. Yeah, that'd be my view on.
Thanks, Tony.
I think it depends on the support and how comfortable maybe that the student feels with talking to their clinical educator or the university about how they feel.
Shireen. Moving on, we've got another question for our students from Ramatu. Ramatu asks, how do you guys handle academic pressure and workload, including the pressure of placements? Who wants to kick us off, Shireen?
I think this placement has actually been nice with managing work. I think when you're in practice and you have to commute far, or you're traveling, when you're commuting far and you travel long distances, once you get home and you feel completely knackered, it's like, I don't want to do any work now. But it's been nice in the sense of when you sign off your day at 4 o'clock, okay, I might take some time, and then then I can start doing some work again. So I think it's definitely been easier to manage work with a virtual placement.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's definitely difficult, but due to like the placement being virtual and it being sort of research focused as well, you're already in that mind space to sort of flip over to dissertation and researching that. So it's been an easier transfer than sort of getting back from placement after you've been on your feet for however long. But it's still difficult, and I think we discussed this last week as the team, and it's finding the support systems and like being on the placement as a group of 4 of us all going through the same thing. It's sort of nice because we all understand and we can all give each other advice if we need to, and give each other that support.
Thanks, Emma. Dan, was there anything you wanted to add?
More of the same sort of stuff. It's for me. I'm doing the BSc. I don't have to do a dissertation, but I've got other assignments and things going on. And some of those are group work. So it's just about kind of setting sort of compartments, I guess, of that. Okay, that this is my placement time. This is downtime. This is an assignment time or group time. I agree with Emma and Shireen. It is easier with this placement virtual because your mind is already sort of in the academic, and you're not as physically tired without the traveling and not standing on your feet all day at bedsides or in the community. You can switch, but yeah, for me, it's about sort of breaking up and putting things into little boxes and dealing with them one by one, really.
Thank you very much. We have time for 2 more questions. Our first is from Hayley. We have a student on placement at the moment who had to isolate as they were contacted by Track and Trace due to contact with someone who tested positive for COVID. How flexible are the number of hours on placements for students? We have given remote learning, so they won't be disadvantaged, but obviously it's quite stressful for the students. Anyone like to take a step?
I'm happy to start us off. So this is the horrid situation of COVID-19, and unfortunately this has happened a few times. We can't guess away from it at the moment, unfortunately, and it affects us all in our work and our students who are on practice education opportunities. What I would say is, if this does happen, please don't be afraid to contact us here at the university or whichever university your student is from. there may be virtual opportunities as you've created yourself, Amy, at your organisation, to enable the student to continue on with the placement opportunity so that they can complete the placement. I'll hand over to Gwyn and Mark if there's any leeway in the hours.
So again, it's thinking about what those hours are spent doing. So an outcomes-based approach. So it could well be, and that's what we're hearing more and more, is the creativity, and thank you to our placement providers for enabling that to happen. So if time is being spent off-site, if you like, but working on the outcomes, towards the outcomes that are set for the placement, then the hours count, if you like. So there is that kind of flexibility, and there is also the flexibility nationally. So thinking of how the HCPC and CSP's guidance is open a little, in that, you know, it's not about necessarily having to meet the 1,000 hours exactly. What it's also thinking about is how those outcomes are addressed. So yes, 1,000 hours, of course, is what we're aiming towards. But if that isn't possible because of COVID, then what's equally important is that the outcomes have been achieved. So thinking about the person's ability to demonstrate that they're meeting the standards of proficiency set by the HCPC, because that is the minimum requirement. That's what you need in order to be registered. So it's thinking about those things, but we do keep a log of the hours that students are completing. So if then we're recognising that somebody's profile is looking short on hours because of illness or other stuff that's happened in life, then we would be thinking about how do we go about optimising that through the design of this placement. Yeah. So I hope that's kind of reassuring to people.
Thank you. Mark, is there anything you wanted to come in on?
No, I think Gwyn covered everything there. It was just about, we've had to be creative and certainly be flexible, as Gwyn was saying, about how we view that, and indeed looking at the learning outcomes at the end of placement, how they are achieved, and of course keeping that eye on the hours, but obviously being able to reassure and work with the educators, as we've done as link tutors, because of all of the academic team, including Tom, myself, Gwyn. We're all, and Claire, we're all linked tutors, so we all support the students on placement and are there to liaise at any point if there are concerns or worries, and we will continue to do that. But creativity and flexibility have become kind of the order of the day, I think, in this new world. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's all we have time for questions. Thank you, everyone. And Thomas, I'd like to hand over to you, please.
Thank you, Neil. I really appreciate everyone that's taken the last few hours to come and join us for this showcase event. We look forward to working with all of our current providers and future providers moving forward, so that we can establish some sustainable practice learning opportunities for here at LSBU, as well as our other HEIs who work very collaboratively with. I'll just give Claire the last word as the head of division, and then we'll finish.
Thank you, Tom. I'd just like to say thank you so much to everybody who's contributed to this afternoon, those people who've attended and those people who've been on the panel. You've been amazing. The questions have been great, difficult, challenging sometimes. They're difficult situations that people are in, but you know, I am always in awe of our fabulous students and how articulate they are and how professional they are in their approach. So thank you to our students, and thank you to the physio team, who again are the same, articulate and professional, and I'm very, very proud of all of you. Thank you so much for everybody who's attended.